The spade struck stone once more. Ezekiel Thornfield muttered curses beneath his breath, dragging his sleeve across his weathered brow as he gazed down at the partially excavated burial site behind his dwelling. 6 feet in length, 3 feet across, precisely the dimensions needed for a man who had surrendered hope entirely. The blazing morning sun pounded down ruthlessly upon the desolate Texas terrain, and he had been excavating since daybreak. His strategy was meticulously planned. Complete the pit by midday, compose a note detailing why his property should transfer to the lending institution, then employ his father's ancient pistol to conclude 37 years of anguish. No relatives to grieve his passing, no companions to feel his absence, simply another abandoned spirit in territory that devoured visionaries and expelled remains. The extended dry spell had destroyed his livestock. The financial institution had issued foreclosure warnings, and his spouse had perished from illness 2 winters prior, taking their unborn offspring with her. What remained for a man who had forfeited everything meaningful? Ezekiel hurled another spadeful of earth, each blow against the hardened ground marking a countdown to his ultimate moment. Then he detected a noise that had no place in his realm of quietude and self-pity. A woman's voice, feeble and frantic, calling from somewhere near his entrance gate. Ezekiel abandoned the spade and seized his firearm, suspecting it might be another deception from those property speculators who had been circling his land like scavengers. He had made his position clear: he would not sell it. Desperate individuals resort to desperate measures as he circled his cabin's corner. He spotted her, a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, fallen against his wooden barrier. Her garment was ripped and soiled, her dark locks matted with grime and perspiration. But what made Ezekiel's pulse quicken was her state. She was expecting a child, likely 8 months along and barely maintaining consciousness. Her lips moved silently as she attempted to speak. One shaking hand pressed against her enlarged abdomen, crimson stained her dress's hem, and her complexion was pale as winter's moonbeam. This wasn't some plot or snare. This was a dying woman requiring assistance. And she had somehow discovered the one man within 50 miles who had been preparing to join her in death. Ezekiel remained motionless, staring at this unexpected gift of purpose that had literally collapsed at his threshold. The same tool he had been using to excavate his own burial site might now be required to enter someone else entirely. But first, he needed to determine if he retained sufficient compassion to attempt saving her. Ezekiel released his weapon and rushed to the barrier, his boots raising dust as he knelt beside the unconscious woman. Up close, he could observe she was merely a girl younger than his. Initial assessment with refined features suggesting a gentler existence than whatever had delivered her to his doorstep. Her respiration was labored, and when he placed his palm against her forehead, her skin blazed with fever. He had witnessed enough illness to recognize her critical condition, but the infant that concerned him most. Her dress was saturated with more than perspiration, and the dark marks told a tale he preferred not to interpret. Time was diminishing. For both of them, without hesitation, Ezekiel lifted her into his arms, astonished by her lightness despite her condition. As he transported her toward his cabin, she stirred slightly, her eyes opening to reveal the most brilliant blue irises he had ever witnessed. For an instant, they focused on his face, and her parched lips attempted to form words. Her voice emerged as barely audible, but he heard it distinctly in the desert stillness. "Please," she whispered, "don't allow my infant to perish." The words struck him like a physical impact. Here was someone battling to bring life into existence while he had been excavating a pit to escape it. The contradiction wasn't lost on him as he pushed through his cabin entrance and placed her gently on his bed, the same bed where he had planned to compose his final message. Ezekiel had delivered foals and calves, but never a human infant. His hands trembled as he retrieved water from his well and clean fabric from his wife's old sewing container. The girl's eyes had closed again, but her breathing remained strained. And every few minutes her body would tense with what he recognized as labor pains, as he began cleansing the dirt and blood from her face. He noticed something that chilled his blood. Around her wrist was a thin rope mark, and there were bruises on her arms resembling finger impressions. Someone had restrained her, someone had harmed her. And somehow she had escaped and reached his isolated ranch. But that meant whoever had done this to her might be searching for her. Ezekiel glanced toward his windows, suddenly aware that his remote location, which had seemed perfect for ending his life privately, might now make him and this girl vulnerable targets for whoever was hunting her. The girl's hand suddenly gripped his wrist with surprising force, her eyes opening wide with panic. "They're approaching," she whispered urgently. "They declared they would locate me regardless of where I fled." Ezekiel's mind raced as he processed her words. He had believed his greatest problem was deciding whether to live or die. But now he had a pregnant girl bleeding in his bed and unknown pursuers potentially heading his direction. The half-excavated grave behind his cabin suddenly seemed the least of his concerns. He moved to his window and surveyed the horizon, searching for dust clouds or movement that might indicate approaching riders. The endless expanse of scrubland and mesquite provided excellent visibility for miles, but it also meant nowhere to conceal themselves if trouble came calling. His ranch sat in a natural hollow surrounded by low ridges that would give any attacker the elevated position. The girl's grip tightened on his wrist. And when he turned back to her, he saw terror in those blue eyes. "My name is Celeste," she said, struggling to sit upright despite her condition. "My father, he sold me to a man named Virgil Blackwood, claimed it was to settle his gambling debts. But Virgil, he's mentally unstable." Ezekiel recognized that name. Every rancher within 100 miles knew about Virgil Blackwood, a wealthy landowner who controlled most of the water rights in 3 counties. Rumors followed him like vultures, whispers about missing girls and unmarked burial sites on his property. The kind of man who purchased judges and sheriffs the way other men bought cattle. "I was imprisoned in his house for 3 months, Celeste continued, her voice gaining strength as anger replaced fear. "He declared the baby was his possession, that he would raise it to become just like him. But when I went into premature labor, Flet stole a horse and rode until it collapsed beneath me, then walked the remaining distance." That explained the rope burns and bruises. It also explained why she had chosen his ranch. It was the most distant outpost from Blackwood's territory, a place where a desperate woman might hope to find refuge. But Ezekiel knew better. Men like Blackwood didn't surrender their property easily, especially when that property was carrying his child. A sharp contraction doubled Celeste over, and she cried out in agony. Her water broke, soaking through the blankets onto his mattress. The baby was coming whether they were prepared or not, and Ezekiel realized he was about to become responsible for 2 lives instead of ending one. He helped her recline, trying to recall everything his wife had told him about childbirth during her pregnancy. But this felt different wrong somehow. There was excessive blood, and Celeste's face was growing paler by the minute. Something was seriously amiss. As if summoned by his fears, the sound of hoofbeats reached his ears, multiple horses riding hard toward his ranch. Ezekiel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, his heart sinking as he counted 6 riders cresting the nearest hill. They rode in formation like men with military training, and at their head was a figure he recognized from wanted posters. Tall, lean, with silver hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. Virgil Blackwood had come to collect his property, and he had brought enough men to ensure no one stood in his way. Content continues with the rest of the paraphrased story. Ezekiel gazed at Celeste, her face contorted in torment as another contraction tore through her slight frame. Blood continued to seep into his mattress, and he could observe her strength diminishing with each labored breath. She was dying, and her infant was dying with her. Yet she was still contemplating protecting an innocent child from becoming a monster. That's when something solidified in his mind. For months, he had been fixated on his own anguish, his own losses, his own reasons to surrender. But this girl had every justification to quit, sold by her father, brutalized by Blackwood, hunted like prey, and yet she was fighting for her child's future with her final breath. "I promise," he declared, meaning it with every fiber of his being, "your baby will be free." Blackwood's ultimatum was nearly expired. Ezekiel could hear the men repositioning outside, probably preparing to storm the cabin from multiple angles. His old military training activated as he evaluated his options. The cabin was solid, constructed from thick pine logs that would halt most bullets. But it only had 2 windows and one entrance, easy to defend, but also easy to trap someone inside. Then he remembered something that made his blood freeze: the burial site he had been excavating behind the cabin. In the chaos of discovering Celeste, he had left the spade right there beside the half-finished pit. If Blackwood's men spotted it, they would know exactly what he had been planning, and they would use that knowledge against him. "Time's expired, Thornfield." Blackwood's voice boomed across the yard. "You made your decision." The first gunshot shattered his front window, sending glass fragments flying across the room. Celeste screamed, not from the gunfire, but from another contraction that seemed to rip through her entire body. Ezekiel dropped low and returned fire, his shot taking one of Blackwood's men from his saddle. But as he reloaded, he heard Celeste gasp, and when he looked back, he saw something that changed everything. The baby's head was crowning, finally coming into position after hours of struggle. But Celeste was unconscious now, her body going through the motions while her spirit fought to remain tethered to life. More gunshots peppered the cabin walls. Ezekiel was trapped between 2 impossible situations. If he left Celeste to fight off the attackers, she and the baby would die during delivery. But if he stayed to help with the birth, Blackwood's men would eventually break down the door and kill them all anyway. That's when he heard Ida, sound that didn't belong in this moment of violence and death. The thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby fighting its way into a world that seemed determined to destroy it before it could take its first breath. The baby was alive, but Celeste lay perfectly still, her eyes closed and her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. Ezekiel realized with growing horror that he might have just witnessed the moment when this brave young woman gave her life to bring her child into the world. Outside, Blackwood's voice cut through the gunfire with deadly certainty. "I smell smoke. Thornfield, we're burning you out." The odor of burning wood confirmed Ezekiel's worst fears. Orange light flickered against the remaining window as flames began to lick at the sides of his cabin. Blackwood's men had torches, and they were systematically setting fire to everything that would burn. Soon he would have to choose between burning alive or stepping outside to face 6 guns. But first, he had to deal with the miracle in front of him. The baby was small but breathing, its tiny lungs filling with air as it cried with surprising strength. Ezekiel had no experience with newborns, but he knew enough to clean the child's face and wrap it in one of his clean shirts as he lifted the baby. He realized something that made his heart skip. It was a girl, just like her mother. Celeste's eyes fluttered open one last time, focusing on her daughter with a clarity that belied her failing strength. She tried to speak, but only managed to whisper, "Rose. Her name is Rose." Then her eyes closed for the final time, and Ezekiel was alone with a newborn baby and a cabin that was quickly becoming a death trap. The flames were spreading faster than he had expected, and smoke was already making it hard to breathe. Baby Rose seemed to sense the danger, her cries becoming more urgent as the temperature in the room began to rise. Ezekiel wrapped the child more tightly and checked. His ammunition 3 bullets left in his rifle, 2 in his pistol. Not nearly enough to fight his way out against 6 men, but maybe enough to give baby Rose a chance. He thought about the promise he had made to Celeste. And suddenly, the plan that formed in his mind seemed like the only option left. The back wall of the cabin was already catching fire. But there was still one way out. That Blackwood's men might not be watching. The root cellar had a second entrance behind the cabin, hidden by an old water barrel. If he could get there without being seen, he might be able to circle around and catch them off guard. But that meant leaving Celeste's body in the burning cabin. And something about that felt like a betrayal of everything she had fought for. This young woman had died protecting her child. And now her final resting place would be a pyre lit by the man who had tormented her, as if reading his thoughts. Baby Rose opened her eyes and looked directly at him, those same blue eyes that had belonged to her mother, but already showing a strength that reminded him of Celeste's final moments. This child was all that remained of a brave woman's fight for freedom, and Ezekiel would be damned if he let Blackwood turn her into his property. He kissed Celeste's forehead one last time, whispering a prayer for her soul, then cradled baby Rose against his chest and moved toward the back of the cabin. The heat was becoming unbearable, and he could hear the roof beams starting to crack from the fire above. But as he reached for the door to the root cellar, he heard something that stopped him. Cold footsteps on the cabin's front porch, and Blackwood's voice much closer now and filled with anticipation. "Don't worry, my dear," the silver-haired man said, apparently talking to someone he thought was still alive inside. "Papa's here to take you and the baby home where you belong. We'll put this unfortunate rebellion behind us and focus on raising my heir properly." Blackwood thought Celeste was still alive, which meant he was about to walk into a burning cabin, expecting to find a helpless woman and newborn waiting for rescue. Ezekiel realized this might be his only chance to end this nightmare once and for all, but it would mean using baby Rose as bait in the most dangerous gamble of his life. Ezekiel made a decision that went against every protective instinct screaming in his head. He positioned himself behind the door, holding baby Rose close to muffle her cries, and waited. The front door creaked open, and he heard Blackwood's boots on the wooden floor, confident and unhurried. "Celeste, darling," Blackwood called out, his voice sickeningly gentle. "I know you're frightened, but this foolishness ends now. Where's my baby?" The silver-haired man moved deeper into the burning cabin, apparently unbothered by the smoke and flames. Ezekiel could see his shadow through the doorway, tall and predatory, searching for his prey. This was a man so arrogant he had walked into a death trap, believing himself untouchable. When Blackwood finally saw Celeste's still form on the blood-soaked bed, his reaction wasn't grief or shock, was rage. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "You would rather die than live as my wife. Fine, but my child better be alive, or I'll burn down every ranch from here to Mexico until I find who helped you." That's when Ezekiel stepped out from behind the door, his rifle trained on Blackwood's chest. The older man spun around, his hand moving toward his pistol, but froze when he saw the bundle in Ezekiel's arms. "Your child is safe," Ezekiel said quietly, "but she's not your property. She's a free American citizen, born on free soil." Blackwood's cold eyes fixed on baby Rose, and Ezekiel saw something inhuman flicker across his face. This wasn't a man looking at his own child. This was a predator calculating the value of his prize. "Give me the baby, Thornfield, and I might let you walk away from this. Keep her, and I'll make sure you die slower than you can imagine." But Ezekiel had already made his choice. The same resolve that had carried him through the war, through his wife's death, through months of despair, now crystallized into something unbreakable. He thought about Celeste's final words, about the promise he had made. about the half-dug grave behind his cabin that suddenly seemed like a symbol of his old life ending and something new beginning. The only thing walking away from here, Ezekiel, said is this child, to a place where she'll grow up free. Blackwood's hand moved toward his gun, but the burning roof beam above chose that moment to give way. It crashed down between them in an explosion of sparks and flame, separating the two men but also blocking Ezekiel's shot. Through the smoke and fire, he heard Blackwood cursing and scrambling toward the door. Ezekiel ran for the root cellar, Baby Rose crying against his chest as the cabin began to collapse around them. He could hear Blackwood shouting orders to his men outside, reorganizing for a final assault. But when Ezekiel emerged from the hidden cellar entrance behind the cabin, he found something that gave him hope for the first time in months. 3 of Blackwood's men lay unconscious near their horses, and a 4th was tied up with his own rope. Standing over them, smoking a cigarette with casual confidence, was a woman Ezekiel recognized, Deputy Marshal Kate Sullivan, the only law enforcement officer in the territory who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Afternoon, Ezekiel," she said with a slight smile. "Heard there might be some trouble out your way." Kate Sullivan had been tracking Blackwood for 3 months, following a trail of missing women and forged legal documents across 2 territories. When she had seen the smoke from Ezekiel's cabin, she had known she had finally found her target. What she hadn't expected was to arrive in time to witness a man willing to die for a child that wasn't even his. Celeste got word out before she escaped, Kate explained as she helped Ezekiel move away from the burning cabin. "Left a message with a sympathetic kitchen girl who got it to me. Been riding hard for 2 days to get here." Behind them, the cabin collapsed completely, sending a pillar of smoke into the desert sky. Blackwood emerged from the wreckage, his expensive clothes singed and his silver hair disheveled, but his eyes still burning with the same cold fury. When he saw Kate's badge, his expression shifted from rage to calculation. "Marshal Sullivan," he said smoothly, straightening his jacket. "Perfect timing. This man has kidnapped my legally adopted daughter and her child. I have the papers right here." Kate didn't even glance at the documents Blackwood pulled from his coat. "Those papers were signed under duress by a father who owed you money. I've got 3 witnesses who'll testify to that, including the girl who died in that fire trying to escape from you." Blackwood's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the monster underneath. "You can't prove anything. My word against a dead girl's." "Don't need her word," Kate replied. "Got yours. You just admitted she was running from you. That makes this kidnapping, false imprisonment, and now murder." For the first time, Ezekiel saw fear flicker across Blackwood's face. The man who had terrorized half the territory was finally facing consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. But cornered animals were the most dangerous. And Ezekiel instinctively stepped between Blackwood and Baby Rose. The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Then Blackwood made his move, drawing his pistol with surprising speed for a man his age. But Kate had been ready for this moment for months, and her shot took him center mass before he could clear leather. Virgil Blackwood crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror ending in the dust of a poor rancher's yard. As he lay dying, his eyes fixed on Baby Rose one last time. And Ezekiel saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features before the light faded completely. In the sudden silence that followed, Baby Rose stopped crying and opened her blue eyes, looking up at the 3 adults who now stood guard over her future. Kate smiled down at the child, then looked at Ezekiel with something like respect. "So, what now?" she asked. "This little one needs a home, and last I heard, you were planning to leave this world permanently." Ezekiel looked down at Rose, thinking about the promise he had made to her mother and the grave he had started digging that morning. It seemed like a lifetime ago that he had been ready to give up on everything. He was holding the most precious thing in the world, a chance to honor a brave woman's sacrifice and raise her daughter to be everything Celeste had dreamed she could be. That grave behind the cabin, he said quietly, I think I'll finish digging it, but not for me. Celeste deserves a proper burial, somewhere peaceful, where her daughter can visit when she's older. Kate nodded approvingly, and after that, Ezekiel looked out at his drought-stricken land, his ramshackle buildings, his uncertain future. 6 hours ago, it had all seemed worthless. Now it looked like the perfect place to raise a little girl who would grow up knowing that freedom was worth fighting for, that good people sometimes appeared when you needed them most, and that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for something beautiful to be born. After that, he said, adjusting baby Rose in his arms as she yawned and settled against his chest, we start building a life worth living. The sun was setting over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in that vast landscape, other stories were unfolding. Other lives were hanging in the balance. Other choices between hope and despair were being made. But here, in this moment, a broken man had found purpose. An innocent child had found safety, and justice had finally caught up with evil. As Kate helped him gather supplies for the journey to town where Rose would need proper medical care, and he would need to start the legal process of adoption, Ezekiel realized something profound. The same shovel he had used to dig what he thought would be his grave had instead helped him bury his old life and uncover something infinitely more valuable. The chance to be the father his own father had never been, to a daughter who would never know the man who had tried to claim her, but would grow up knowing the man who had chosen to save her. Now click on that video on the screen to hear another incredible story from the Old West about a mysterious stranger who rode into town with a secret that changed everything. You won't believe what happens next. Click now.